something to say, they just say it. So
Our Quaker meeting in Hamilton meets by Zoom.
And there are other Zoom meetings too with.
And that must be kind of a strange experience. If you keep silence in your Quaker meeting and you're all doing it on Zoom, do you look around at each other being quiet? Or
I have a lovely backyard, so sometimes I have deer grazing.
You know, I had a lovely conversation, just the beginnings of one with Paul Mallet this morning. He was telling me a little about the work that he's about to do, some sort of project. And I wonder, Paul, maybe if you could share what it is you're up to with the group.
What they've decided to do is, given the situation in the United States, is to try to come up with a draft policy, federal government policy, which deals with the looking forward on the prevention of global conflict. Instead of starting with just cause and things like the presumption of guilt and death and violence and all that sort of thing, it begins with the idea that we have to stop conflict, we have to care for the victims, then we do negotiation, reconstruction, and at the very end you can get into justice and reconciliation, rather than starting with some presumption of justice at the front end. So the strategy's perspective, of course, ties into the notion of the pandemic that we've got now. And we are saying that there is an entanglement going on here. And the entanglement, of course, is the issue of pandemics with climate change and with conflict. If you have a nuclear war, you're going to get climate change and you're going to get severe epidemics or pandemics going on, and vice versa.
You're also going to get a famine, it sounds like. Richard's tying famine into it, right?
That's right. If you have a big climate disaster, you are going to get severe health issues. So there is this interaction, and this interaction and entanglement is probably begging for a new consciousness that's going to encompass all of these three things.
What would we include in the kind of package that you are proposing? It sounds like what you're proposing is what we in Project Save the World called a platform for survival, a list of reforms or interventions and plans for structural changes that would take care of a number of these interlocking systemic problems. Is that right? Can you maybe give us some examples of the kinds of proposals that would be on your platform for survival?
Well, ours is going to be a relatively holistic one. We have put it in the context of three things. Of course, the existential challenges are pandemics, climate, environmental degradation, and conflict or war. And then the positive piece side is going to be the well-being of humanity and all living things, and the conservation and protection of the natural environment, and some improved harmonious and peaceful global coexistence. So there's going to have to be some very, very concerted effort in looking at the attitudes and the behaviors of leaders that are either contributing to this or not, and having that as pretty well a focus.
Let's consider that. It sounds like you're saying if we get good leaders, then we've got a chance. But how are you going to get good leaders? Because we're also demoralized that people are going to keep on voting for Trump. I don't think I correctly attributed that to you, but it's one of my worries.
There is going to be some consciousness. I mean, I am hopeful that in November that there is a massive leadership change in the United States. And
I am too. But let's you and I have a little debate here, because I'm not sure I would agree with you that the first step is to try to get rid of your leader. I think the first step is to come up with some sort of sensible plan, and then get so much grassroots support that eventually the leader says, oh, that's where the votes are. I'm going to have to go in that direction to get it. And you see this happening right now, because we had people put together this thing called the Green New Deal, or the New Green Deal or something. And it is pretty similar in a way to the Platform for Survival. So, you know, I won't claim credit for it, but I think ours is a little better because it includes more about militarism, where the New Green Deal doesn't. But in any case, it's a pretty good set of recommendations for changes that are really going to be needed. Now, what happened is that Bernie Sanders buys this thing, goes out and, you know, pretty much adopts it as, or something very similar, as his own package. And now what's happened is that Bernie, you know, of course he lost, but Joe Biden is feeling, okay, I've got to move over to the left and pick up votes from these people, because it looked like Bernie had a whole lot of votes. So he's moved over, and they say that if you look at what he's proposing now, he's really very similar to what Bernie was proposing, and that's because there was a grassroots and enough grassroots support. So he's buying into that, where he absolutely wouldn't have done it otherwise. I mean, so I think that's the strategy we want to use. But otherwise, these leaders are going to go their own way, and they're in the pocket of billionaires, and they're going to incorporate interests, and they're going to keep on doing it. So now, you and I disagree. Tell me where I'm wrong.
Well, we don't disagree. I think that the basic strategy has to be that we have to work all ends against the middle here. Certainly, there is what the population wants, and I mean, if that was a way of making change, you know, if you looked at some of the polls on any of the issues of the nuclear weapons ban treaty and things like this, there's no reason that Trump should have either withdrawn from a lot of these treaties, because they're very popular. So you do have the two issues. I mean, but you look at who has the power, you know, in these kinds of issues. I mean, if we were saying the nuclear weapons ban treaty has a big problem, or a problem with proliferation, there's 5 people in the P5 group that, if they had the necessary will and incentive and whatever, could solve this problem this afternoon. But
I just don't feel I have as much effect. I belong to a whole bunch of groups like Pugwash and the Group of 78, all these groups. They always write these documents, and they're very, very careful how to phrase it and make sure it all sounds exactly right, and they quibble over little words and stuff, and they send it off, and it doesn't make a bit of difference in the world, because they don't pay any attention. Now, if we could march in there with a bunch of people saying, look, out in the hall, you're going to see 5,000 people waiting to talk to you about this same point, then they listen. So I think that's where we have to work, changing public opinion.
Well, and we do that every day. But if we enter into this as a response-oriented thing, we can succeed at least by doing something. You know, I mean, we can't eradicate crime, but we can wake up every day, and the courts do things, and the police do things, and whatever, and society gets from day to day. And we may be in that kind of framework where we have to do things in the moment. Power.
I think that right now there's a moment in public opinion where people are a bit more open. They say, you know, what we've been doing obviously isn't working here. What else have we got? Listen, you know. And I think there is a possibility now for more effect.
I think it's, you know, great to put forward a plan. And I agree that in some ways there are great opportunities following COVID. But what I'm not sure that putting forward a cooperative plan is always going to work. If we just look at what's going on in the U.S. in the last couple of days. Yes. How do you deal with the frustrations, you know, where peaceful protesters are overcome and ruin everything, and violent demonstrations ruin everything? How do you deal with the frustrations of the people who are going violent?
Well, what do you think? I mean, I think that is a really important question to talk about. How could we do anything that makes a difference in Minneapolis?
You know, it only takes a small event, and we could have the Arab Spring here. You know, you look at what touched off the Arab Spring in the Middle East. And then you can ask yourself a question: is this one of these significant events that's going to get out of control? I mean, once I got 33 years in the military, and I know one thing, that once conflict starts, you lose control of it. It has a life of its own.
What would you do about it, Paul?
Well, first thing, everyone has, the things are obvious. Everyone has to kind of calm down. There has to be but some of these concerns and things that they have are so deep rooted that are cultural and relational, that the first thing that normally tries to happen is you try to have a transactional solution. And a transactional solution, of course, is ceasefires and agreements and all of these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
But if that doesn't go along with a relational solution, I mean, I can give you all sorts of great solutions for the Palestinians and the Israelis. But if they don't like each other at a relational level, you're going to have continued problems. So you've got to work both the transactional and the relational side.
We have a finger up, and that's somebody from the Voice of Women.
But my question is, hi, and I think we're talking about the riots. And my question is, look at our space. So I'm also an older white woman, and we're talking about issues that really are I mean, the way I see it is I have to do my anti-oppression work, my understanding of the connection of the history of slavery and racism, and listen to those voices. I mean, we're talking about 400 years, and I don't know what in the States, I don't see that there's been a pathway to reparations and reconciliation. And so I'm just curious, we're in this space talking about it, we have ideas, but what kind of work have you as peace activists been able to do in terms of your own decolonization and anti-oppression work? Because I guess that's where it starts for me.
About a dozen of us, I guess, on this call, and I don't see anybody who looks like a Black person from Minneapolis. And therefore, I think maybe that's part of the problem. We invite people in general, but we maybe don't reach out in a way that works to get people to actually come and tell us if telling would do it. And maybe that's not the answer.
Kevin in Ontario up there has mentioned doing previous activism work with Indigenous populations.
Yeah, for me, everything like what's happening in the United States right now is not isolated to the United States. It's now, there is standing street actions happening around the world. There's been a few street actions in Canada in support. There's people gathering at the U.S. Embassy in the UK. This is something that I think there's a lot of people are underestimating in terms of how many people are paying attention to what's going on right now. And because 3 weeks ago, we had between 1/3 and 50% of the world's population in some form of quarantine. And there has been action groups like Fridays for Future, youth groups that have been unable to be in the streets for months. But I can tell you that they're all online doing calls like this. Mm-hmm. And I stumbled into this one. And, there is, there's a temperature that's available right now to utilize and to organize and strategize, and it's all happening. So
I also think that the old ways, that there is a palatable shift in terms of breaking open the barriers and particularly from a gendered view, and that it's maybe a time for me personally, sometimes I think in the group that I'm in, we're trying to seed out, we're trying to make connection. We're reading online the Lord Dalhousie report on the history of racism and slavery to really understand the roots of racism in Halifax, because without an understanding of how these systems have permeated.
Out of all of the calls that I've been on, which I'm very active in these types of things, it doesn't matter what color, what country, but when you get, when you try and find that common denominator amongst us all, it keeps coming up to me. It's the isolation of wealth and greed. So really the isolation of wealth and the trajectory of the isolation of wealth is, that's the global issue. And everything else that's underneath that is easily points back to, even to fix it, it's going to cost money. It's going to cost, even when you take a look at climate and the science around climate change and climate tipping points, all the science speaks about immediate mitigation where you stand, and as being the best way to prepare for the future, and for people to be able to do mediation or do that preparation. There's a requirement that's, to be more localized, more regional. All those things cost money.
We have a finger back up in Halifax.
Well, I'll do two fingers.
All
So
right.
I just want to thank you, Kevin. I think that definitely the imperialistic capitalistic system is part of the root of evil. However, I want to go back to the beginning of what you said in terms of, and I don't think erasure is the way to go. There is an intersectional dimension of power, and although we can base our difference in love for one another, with that erasure, we're doing a great harm, and it's a place of privilege, which has gotten us where we are.
Terry Reichland is in Wales. Terry, do you have anything to share about this?
Hi, everyone. I think that environmental justice plays a big part in all of this, obviously. You see a lot of communities which are not as privileged, living in areas. And sorry, my background, I'm a forester, an urban forester, so my goal is to basically plant trees, for the people, and so they can have close access to nature surrounding their houses. So basically, I'm coming kind of from that perspective that usually people in wealthier areas have a closer proximity to park spaces and green spaces. So I'm kind of trying to plant trees in deprived areas, starting with South Wales, where I did a big project about a month ago, planting trees in about 11 primary schools. So I think the environment that people have access to plays a big part in it, because
it's another way in which, Terry, that these issues connect, because you're talking about
Absolutely.
making life more agreeable for people living in very sordid urban situations. And certainly even their health is improved by living among trees. That's true.
That's right.
But,
That's right.
there's also the thing that we're saving the world by planting trees. We need about 2 trillion more of them. So bless your heart. Keep going, girl.
Thank you.
Do we have comments to give to Paul? Because I think, I just love the idea that they're going to create a set of proposals for change that if the U.S. adopted it, that would make a big difference. But I hope that we get pretty specific and concrete. And I'm not sure how specific they are going to be. Although I must say that Barbara Birkett, you seem to raise questions about whether it is even worth trying to make a specific set of proposals, no?
We are going to look at things like mimetic structures. A mimetic structure is basically the root of all of this. These structures is that people tend to mimic their environment and their values and their beliefs in order to survive or belong. So if you're caught in that sort of construct...
You used a term that I'm not familiar with. Mimetic structures. Mime as in imitate.
Yes, it comes from the word mimic. That one mimics one's the environment or values that you learn from parents. or schools or anything in order to survive. So the first thing that you really have to look at is that the awareness of what mimetic structure is operating. If it's a mimetic structure of violence where you're passing on hate or racism or things like this, or mimetic structures of relative well-being and blessing. So once the awareness or consciousness of these mimetic structures come to the fore, you can start looking at how you can basically break cycles. In the residential schools problem that we had there are some people who are just incapable of forgiving these kinds of things. Out of the options that are available, the foundation to me is education. If you can
Okay,
be
now I think we have a little distinction here very worth exploring, and that is somebody said it's all class, or, you know, I'm exaggerating, but it's about money. And it's about money, but I think it's also about dignity, acceptance, being part of a group, feeling that you're in alignment with the people around you. All of these status issues that are not just reducible to financial ones. And I personally am, you know, my ears flap when you start talking about mimetic structures, because I hadn't even heard the word before, but I like it. I know that Chan has his hand raised. Yeah.
My point of view is a bit of a serious worry that I find the whole world is in disarray. When I see that US doesn't have good terms with China, and then China doesn't have good terms with Japan, and then India doesn't have good terms with Pakistan, Israel doesn't have good terms with Lebanon, South Sudan doesn't have good terms with North Sudan, and the whole world, if you see Iran and having problem with US makes sanctions to Russia, China, Iran, and they see as if they are the something like demigod kind of. If they are going to use due to war between any of these countries who are nuclear armed countries, the seriousness and the disaster is going to be so irreversible and irreparable that it's going to create a devastating effect. So I find that the things are in totally out of control kind of a situation.
Jan, what do you hope for as the most promising intervention to turn any of this around? That's really the question.
Yes, the main thing is that what I feel is that the 5P countries of the UN, the 5 permanent nations, when they have signed already in 1970, even till today, after 50 years, that's not being honored by them. Who can bell the cat? Tell me. Anything else first to see that these nuclear weapons are totally dismantled and totally taken out from the planet, then you can attend to other problems.
I disagree with you. I absolutely think we have to do nuclear weapons immediately, but I also think we have to do about 6 or 8 other things also immediately. So I do not believe that we can say we'll do this one first, then this one in sequence. It won't work that way. We have to do it all at once. That's why we need a systemic package. We need a whole list of things that all are, the answers are interdependent too, because the problems are interdependent.
I agree with you, Meta, but my concern is that when one problem itself, the whole world is unable to address it, and you are telling all the problems at the same time, I feel that it is too good to perform.
It's overwhelming. Any one of them is overwhelming. But you know what happens? If you address them as a package, the whole package is less overwhelming than the parts. Because you can't solve nuclear weapons by itself. You got to do a whole bunch of other things simultaneously. And if you address it as a package, then a huge, big list of things that we're going to do all at once, that takes care of a whole bunch of things at once.
That all those 6 problems, what you are saying, I've read also, and then I said one more to be added to that. Then you said these 6 will take up, because I said about water, I think I've added the 7th one as. So, but what I'm saying is that when you are taking 6 problems all at a time, either your strength or the focus may get diluted. And the second thing is that while you are taking up everything, that probably, postponing or delaying it gets more eminent kind of a thing. I don't know, but thing is that they're going out of our hand, and I don't know when it's going to burst out.
I agree with Meta that we have to look at it as a package. The package is the climate change, and that we need to put back the nuclear onto the social movement of the climate. The second thing I agree with Meta is that we need to get the numbers. What we need to be focusing on is the youth and the millennials.
Saying to engage more millennials and young people in the activism around nuclear weapons?
Mm-hmm.
Or
about everything.
My thought is international support for the World Health Organization. This is one of the few relics of the old idea of a United Nations. And if at this time of pandemic, it's not a big stimulus, it really is a kind of 2x4 approach, because everyone has been in it. And if there can be some focus on restoring the World Health Organization as an international organization, the determinants of health really encompass everything that is being spoken of, whether it's economic, whether it's political, whether it's nuclear. And it's something that I think that there could be some shared effort, and certainly across the generations.
Well, fine. Chan, do you want to reply?
Main worry is that there's a kind of bomb in my hand, and I don't know when it will be, used. Once it is used, then we cannot talk anything more. There ends the matter. Mm-hmm. There ends the matter. So why to get into that kind of a situation? Instead of that, try to see that, resolve the thing which is very much in urgency. I appreciate all the 6 issues, what you said are seriously concerned for every one of us. I would like to also say that, see, North Korea is another headache, as how every time the serious threat, whether I can say as a mad person or what I can say, I don't know, but then it's like that. So these things, how we can get rid of them? Without that, see, so many people are there with a lot of knowledge, with a lot of wisdom, but still we are not able to solve it for the past 50 years. Is not a small time. I feel that quite discouraging when 50 years could not make this problem solved by such great, personalities across the world. Then that means there's something seriously wrong with the whole world.
Well, there sure is. There's certainly something serious.
The isolation of wealth. It's the isolation of wealth in every country, and it's greed, and that's what the youth are. That's what the youth are talking about right now. That's what they're talking about.
Can I add to that? Sorry.
Okay, Terry.
Sorry. So yeah, just a bit of like a millennial outlook on this. There is definitely the whole wealth thing that is currently basically preventing millennials from thinking about, the greater good, I guess, because everyone's struggling to make a paycheck. Like, we've all got like thousands and thousands of dollars in student debt. Like, there's not that much that we can, dedicate our free time to, because everyone's doing extra jobs and everyone's working overtime just to like make ends meet, because the whole like wealth misallocation, I would say. where there's a big generational difference, right? It's going to be so much more difficult for me to be able to, let's say, buy a house by the time I'm 35 or whatever. And that is basically, I think, one of the obstacles, which is preventing millennials from, doing the good work that you guys would like us to be doing right now. That's kind of like a viewpoint that I think should, be expressed as a
I hear you, and
part of the conversation.
I recognize the fact that you're the only person probably under 45 here. Andrei Kamenchikov would be someplace in that neighborhood, maybe. But maybe most of us are over 70. I'm not sure. Andrei Kamenchikov is in Ukraine, in Kiev. On one of these talk shows a while back, when Joanna Santa Barbara in New Zealand was putting forward a package of ideas, and you took exception to the whole idea of putting a whole package together.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I'm not in that age category either. I'm 53 now, so
You've passed 45?
I'm 53 now, so yeah. When I listen to these conversations, I have mixed feelings, because I see that there's a lot of good intentions and good energy, but there's also, I think, a lack of understanding of how to move forward with this. And I don't have any magic solutions. I do think that what is important is to try to make very clear, short, concise messages.
Of all of the list of 25 proposals that the Platform for Survival put forward, that are also on the new Green Deal that people are talking about, the one that I hear is actually not outrageously impossible anymore is the idea of a universal basic income. A year ago, people would have said, that's ridiculous, you couldn't possibly afford it. But now people say, well, now you can send me a check for, I just got a check from the U.S. government for $1,200. I haven't even been in the U.S. for several years. So, but I'm a citizen, and they sent it to everybody. Now, if they can do that now, how come they didn't do it last year? Not that I wanted it last year, but some people needed it. And very realistically, people could say, yeah, if you can do it now, you could have done it all along. So let's do it all along from now on. And I hear that that's the most reasonable expectation for something quite radical to come out of it. Do you think a universal basic income would make that much difference, Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's an inevitability that we're going to eventually have to get there anyways. If it's not by everyone, the reality of AI and robotics, like all these, like it's just a matter of time. However, that's like decades away, when we still have a lot of science is speaking about like what's happening in the next 20 years. So absolutely, UBI is probably going to be one thing, but we're going to need to be way more localized, because these things are going to start impacting us, as we see right now in the U.S. There's things that are happening in smaller circles. And there's resiliency, and localized resiliency is going to be absolutely necessary. Like if you take a look at what's happening in our grocery stores right now, just because of COVID, if we go to the grocery store, everyone's produce department is shrunk by at least 50%. And this is just based on what's happening due to the supply chain of COVID. This isn't even suggest like this doesn't even have any of this upcoming season's crops in mind, and we're already seeing a huge shrink in our produce. So the supply chain is going to start to be the next thing that people are going to be talking.
I want to just make one reference to something Hannah Newcomb said when a group of us were involved in getting peace studies. Everything matters, but you as individuals or small groups can't do everything. choose where you're going to focus. So each of us can figure, if we can figure out where to put our emphasis. I have been wearing, although it finally broke, a white armband that came out of the Make Poverty History campaign, but it goes back to the limits to growth. If we continue to assume that the new normal will somehow re-encapsulate the creation of wealth for everybody in the world, we are doomed because the resources won't sustain it. A gradual simplification of life and limiting of our expectations, especially in the first world and the rich world, would be my contribution. But making poverty history, reducing our expectations of what we can have to ensure that everyone can have enough to live, I think it does get into the issue of making poverty history and making sure that everybody has enough to live.
Charles Tauber is in Croatia.
Yeah, I'm in Vukovar in Croatia. And in fact, next month will mark 25 years that I'm here. Wonder of wonders. It's been a long time and lots has happened. And at the moment, we're working online in a lot of different parts of the world with the psychological issues of people. We're working in Congo. We're working in Nigeria. We've got volunteers who are working with migrants in Greece. We've got 2 groups in Würzburg in Germany working with the integration of migrants. We've got a suicide prevention group here and a group of the parents of people with psychiatric diagnoses. Now, what I wanted to say actually is one of the things that I'm very concerned about is that, and I'm a doctor, and in that sense, I'm very concerned that health is not considered to be a human right, and that healthcare must be, and I stress must be, free and available to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
We went through this when I was a kid. My aunt was quite ill. She had an autoimmune disease and ultimately died of it. And my mother ultimately died of cancer. Now, we had money because we had enough money just about to survive because they were both school teachers. But I know of so many people that don't have the money just to get basic health care. How we would cover it, take money out of the so-called defense budget. If healthcare is not defense, I don't know what is.
Mm-hmm.
The other point that I want to make, and I'm trying to be a little bit brief, is that the other issues that I'm hearing about, the other health issues, because of COVID, are being ignored. I'm getting a continual stream of emails that, for example, measles, that kids are not getting basic vaccines, that there is a great deal of highly resistant tuberculosis around, that dengue is still a problem, that malaria is huge, and we can go on, and I can go on forever with a list. We must not only talk about COVID, we must talk about health in general. Today we were talking about, for example, with one group that I'm working with in Congo, about former child soldiers. UNICEF is saying that there are 230,000, and they expect that to be a vast underestimate. We're talking about sexual abuse. Again, it's being ignored. I have a number of clients who have been sexually abused, and we're getting more of them. In the UK, the BBC reported a couple of years ago that fully 30% of the UK population had been sexually abused as kids. In the Congo, they're saying that over 90% of women and something like 70% of men have been sexually abused. Now, these are issues that are, if we are talking about creating peace, if we are talking about diminishing conflict, if we do not deal with these traumas, and if we do not deal with these illnesses, both physical and psychological, we are not going to get anywhere.
We need a triage approach. You bring the patient in shock, so the first person injects the adrenaline and sets up the IV. Meanwhile, somebody else is setting up the antibiotics for the sepsis that's causing the shock. Then somebody else is working on a place in the ward where they can be brought back to reasonable health. Somebody else, social workers, working on where they can send the patient back into the community. And this is all going on at once. So.
I like that because it actually speaks to what Paul Descartes was saying a little while ago. I think Paul was, in effect, disagreeing with me when I said we have to look at it as a whole system, make sure that we're doing everything at once. And he was saying, well, you can only do so much, just do what you can do. No one person can do it all. That's true. But if we all see ourselves as part of a team.
No, that's what I meant.
Okay, good.
In the media recently, there's this a few articles, Washington Post and a few other agencies, saying that Trump wants to restart the weapons testing in the U.S. So what are folks' thoughts on that? And do you think that's actually going to happen? And if so, how long of a process would it be until this weapons testing began?
Whether anybody can stop him, if Congress said we're going to pass a law, probably they could do it. If somebody could say that the courts would find him overstepping his legal rights in ordering it to restart, then that's a possibility. But I don't know of any likely mechanism for stopping him.
Well, one thing I was wondering is, does the U.S. have any active test sites? Los Alamos is a bit of a tourist site. The Trinity test site is a bit of a tourist site. The Aleutian Islands were where they were previously doing some testing, but I thought that was under a treaty ban now, or largely considered kind of taboo to do testing there. Do they have an actual active test site in the 21st century?
But I think the fact that the legal argument, of course, is the test ban treaty. But the other part of it is that the military has said they could resume it in months. But you may not be talking about a nuclear yield here. You may be talking about components and explosives and other things in the train, the technology that they are prohibited from doing under the test ban treaty.
That's a very good point. Are they referring to kind of a nuclear yield explosion of an actual test of a warhead, or are they just testing various components? I heard a few years ago that aerogel used, the fog bank aerogel used in some of the warheads was getting to an expiry point and they had to remake it. So some of the components, could they be doing a more intensive testing of those to see how they've aged? Because some of those are 30 or 40 years old at this point.
Well, that's one of the things about nuclear weapons. If you leave them long enough, they'll just disintegrate. I mean, the explosive components are organic, and they have a finite shelf life.
I heard that the aerogel components was going through some, before they had replaced them, it was going through unpredictable chemical changes, and that's the intermediate kind of explosive element of that. And also the fuses were wearing out, and Los Alamos had to actually reverse engineer some of these components, and they didn't have very clear instructions from the original team that made these. It was a bit of a challenge to reverse engineer that. So do you think, Colonel Mallet, that is going to be kind of a more of like individual component testing rather than a nuclear yield, an actual explosion?
I think that's what they would do. They have to produce firing mechanisms and all of these things, electronic components, which all have fixed lives. And certainly they don't have the old components from where back when. So they've either got to re-engineer this $1.2 trillion modernization. Probably if you defunded that, all the nuclear weapons would probably be, or a good percentage of them would be useless in probably less than a decade.
Yeah, I heard there's some they have stored down in Louisiana, and it's not just internal degradation of the weapons, but external ones. The ones in high humidity environments down at the base in Louisiana have fungus and mold growing on them from scraping off the missile components.
The biggest risk problem in resuming testing is that they would start testing of nuclear weapons that are actually usable. These very, very small nuclear weapons that they're trying to develop that'll go on to missiles, that sort of thing. That is part of this program. That is the big danger. I mean, the weapons that they have existing now are totally unusable in a military sense. I mean, it's just a no-win situation, and they say it's for deterrence, but that's debatable also. But it's the new family of weapons.
The new family of weapons. Do you know if the components of the pre-existing weapons, can the cores of the bomb, the plutonium cores and other elements like that, can they be reused, or would those degrade as well, in addition to the aerogel, the metal casing, stuff like that?
Well, they all have half-lives, the plutonium cores and that kind of thing. But it's, hundreds of thousands of years. So
yeah, it's like 24,000 years for plutonium or something like that.
50 years doesn't get you there.
Yep. And I can see Dr. Birkett has her hand up there as well.
No, that's all right. I think Paul answered the question.
No, nobody's told me the answer to your first question was, where is this underground testing site, and is it ready to be reused? I'm not sure they would be reusing it, because maybe that's not what they wanted, where they'd like to use it. But I have not kept track of the current status of underground tunnels wherever they used to do it.
I don't think you need them.
Be up to date on that?
Yeah, I don't think you need them anymore.
Yeah, there is some concerns about the ones that are being used in the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, in that the actual nuclear weapons testing could have induced a seismic event. We are registering small seismic events, but that's right on the very tip of the active area with volcanoes and earthquakes. Now, whether they could resume testing in New Mexico and Nevada, we already know the populations in those areas. And Dr. Ann Firsch sent me some materials a while ago saying that they wanted to do nuclear weapons not nuclear weapons, my apologies, radioactive waste storage and nuclear waste storage in these locales. And the populations in the surrounding communities were already staunchly opposed to that. And I cannot possibly see if they're opposed to nuclear waste storage, allowing for nuclear weapons testing to resume in those locations. So it'd be very interesting to see where they would propose doing this kind of intensive testing if they decide to do an explosive element. There is also, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Dr. Greg Spriggs' research out of Lawrence Livermore, but he started looking at the old Cold War era test films, like those reel-to-reel films, and said that they think some of the yields on the nuclear weapons could be off by 15 to 30%. Because they were doing hand calculations. So there's some very interesting concerns about whether the weapons are actually as accurate or as powerful as they think they are.
Yeah, I go back to the conversation of Dr. Chand, I believe, and the whole issue of where do we start. I think the big package might be out of reach, but if you look at a pandemic, it produces 500,000 deaths or whatever it is. It's an issue of months. If you look at climate disasters, that could be over decades building. But nuclear war is minutes. It's minutes and hours once these wars start. And if we think we have a problem with the pandemic, I mean, this is nothing compared to what would happen in issues of major climate disasters or war. I mean, we're not destroying infrastructure and cities and cholera and water and all of these sorts of things. With a health issue as important as we must deal with. So you wind up with the theory of intractable questions. How do you get somewhere when the problem seems to be intractable? And of course the common sort of wisdom about an intractable question is you work the meta questions around it. So you try to work all the other issues to change the attitudes about nuclear weapons, for example, and all the other things. Peace and coexistence, economic interdependence, health, and these kinds of issues that are going to make these nuclear weapons unneeded. You're looking at a long-term solution against what could be a very, very short-term disaster or occurrence or event. And I guess I would say the most dangerous country in the world with regards to that is Pakistan.
You know, there's somebody who probably worries more about Pakistan's nuclear weapons than you do, and it's Chan, because he's sitting in India right now with his hand up.
All the 9 nuclear armed states are equally dangerous. You cannot undermine any one of these 9 nuclear armed states, first thing. Second thing is, just I want to tell you on the note of uranium isotope of 238, which is the most stronger and stable one, as you are telling about half-life, is about 4.87 billion years. 4.87 billion years, which is almost equal to the the age of this Earth. Age is almost the same, 4.87 billion years. So now coming back to our topic is that you are telling about testing treaty ban for the nuclear weapon testing. US, see, US, who is going to stop them? US is such a thing where anything is done, there's no force to stop. There has to be something to stop them, because it is, first thing is, it is illegal testing nuclear weapon. They are breaking their own rule kind of a thing. Second thing is
sorry, are all types of testing illegal, or is it just atmospheric and marine testing?
Any testing is illegal.
Even in space?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Especially in space.
Yeah. And second thing is that Congress is the other powerful mechanism by which they can stop this kind of nonsense, I can call it as, because if you are trying to do, whosoever is doing such a thing, it is disastrous. How can they do, which is totally illegal? Who is going to stop? It's really, I really want to see that accountabilities, how they can be, made onto these people like US. US is making everything, every law, and then they break the law. This is really ridiculous, frankly.
And if I may add a point, I think it's also important to acknowledge non-state actors and the risk that fissile materials end up in their hands as well.
Yeah.
You're right. It could tumble from Iran to Saudi Arabia. I mean, this thing could really get out of hand. But the thing is, the United Nations is a collegial organization. It is not an enforcement organization, other than being able to have sanctions, and all of these things are voluntary, and all of these treaties are voluntary. You can withdraw from them at any particular time. So,
that is a drawback. And who is going to have power in order to impose such rules and laws? Who is there? I really find something vacuum kind of a thing, where there's nobody to control. These kind of things are going out of control, and there's nobody to actually impose. If the law, who is there to see that?
In international theory, it's the American people who have the power to impose something. And
I just want to add one more question to Dr. Chan there. If you have a country like India with a multi-billion or multi-trillion-dollar economy that wants to withdraw from a treaty, the traditional sanctions, would those work in that circumstance? If you have a country that could sustain itself economically for a while, with even if there's sanctions in place?
Particularly with this nuclear weapons, they are sort of, you can call them as rogue countries, because they have them, and then nobody is coming forward to eliminate them. If they don't eliminate, things will keep on extending the same kind of status. And India, for your information, history says that India never fought any war initiated by India. Never in the history. India is always defensive, defends themselves. And also India preaches on, first thing is non-violence. Second thing is that India says that until we won't be the first one to initiate nuclear war. We won't be the first one. But if somebody does, probably India can, they'll attack back for defending themselves. So in this manner, India is definitely a safer country which will not poke into anybody's affair, or they will not initiate. But on the other hand, just to tell you, Pakistan is such a small country with smaller economy, but they even starve to make nuclear weapons because they don't have money to eat, but they have money to make nuclear weapons, which is madness to the core. Madness to the core.
I have another event that I have to get to immediately, so I'm going to have to end this recording now. And thank you all for coming. And I will be back on the last Sunday of next month as well. So I hate to interrupt this way. We could keep going, but I absolutely have to do it.
Well, that's unfortunate because I could see one or two people had their hands up with questions. I could see Kevin did and perhaps Dr. Birkett.
I can't figure out how to do this, so we got to go. Okay, bless your hearts, everybody. Thanks so much, and carry on. Bye-bye.
This conversation is one of the weekly series Talk About Saving the World, produced by Peace Magazine and Project Save the World. Please visit our website at tosavetheworld.ca, where you can sign the Platform for Survival, a list of 25 public policy proposals that, if enacted, would greatly reduce the risk of 6 global threats to humankind. Come back next week for another discussion of a serious global issue.
Yeah.